Graywood Acres Farm, a vast expanse of land handed down through generations, was Daniel Harper's haven. His family had tilled the soil for over a century, enduring storms, droughts, and every challenge life could throw their way. For Daniel, waking up to the sight of endless green fields, the rich scent of freshly turned earth, and the soft chorus of his animals was the only peace he ever needed. It was a life rooted in tradition, grueling labor, and the quiet pride of being part of something enduring, something far greater than himself. But that serenity, that heritage, was about to be torn apart by a force more cunning and persistent than any act of nature. Margaret Winslow, the self-proclaimed queen of the Graywood Estates Homeowners Association, was that force. Graywood Estates, a bland suburban sprawl, had popped up a few years earlier, a grid of identical houses, flawless white fences, and residents fixated on appearances. At the center of this obsessively groomed world stood Margaret, a woman who lived for control. She brandished the HOA rulebook like a sword, enforcing her rigid idea of suburban perfection with ruthless precision. To Margaret, rules weren't optional, they were holy commandments carved in stone. It was only a matter of time before Daniel caught her attention, his old-fashioned farm a glaring blemish in her polished white gown. The first time Margaret swept into Graywood Acres, she came with the stern resolve of a commander surveying a battlefield. Clad in a spotless white blouse and tan slacks, clutching her clipboard like a royal decree, she strode up to Daniel's porch as if she owned the place. Daniel, lounging with a steaming mug of coffee, watched her approach, a spark of amusement in his eyes, though a twinge of wariness stirred in his gut. "Good morning," she announced, her voice sharp and overly formal. "You must be Mr. Harper." Daniel took a slow sip of his coffee, meeting her gaze steadily. "That's me. Can I help you?" "I'm Margaret Winslow, president of the Graywood Estates Homeowners Association." She flashed a tight, rehearsed smile that never warmed her cold eyes. "I'm here to discuss a matter of serious concern regarding your property." Daniel raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "I didn't realize my farm had anything to do with Graywood Estates." "Well," she began, her tone thick with condescension, "technically it doesn't. However, your farm borders our community, and we've had several complaints from residents. Property values are a fragile thing, you understand." Daniel set his mug down, leaning back in his chair as irritation flickered inside him. "Complaints, huh? About what?" Margaret glanced at her clipboard as if she needed a refresher on her list of grievances. "For starters, the color of your barn is less than ideal. That bold red clashes terribly with our community's aesthetic. We suggest repainting it something neutral, like a soft beige or pale gray." Daniel stared at her, silent for a long moment, trying to decide if she was serious or pulling some elaborate prank. The barn had stood for nearly 7 decades, its faded red paint as much a part of it as the weathered planks and the rusty weather vane atop it. "Repaint it?" The idea was laughable. "Not happening," he said flatly. Unfazed, Margaret flipped a page on her clipboard. "Then there's the issue of your rooster," she said, pausing for effect. "Multiple residents have reported being woken up before dawn. It's quite disruptive." Daniel let out a low chuckle, crossing his arms. "So let me get this straight," he said, a edge creeping into his voice. "You want me to repaint my barn and somehow train a rooster to sleep in because your people can't handle country sounds?" Margaret's smile stayed frozen, but her eyes glinted with annoyance. "Mr. Harper, I know change can be hard, but this is for everyone's benefit. I'd hate for this to escalate into a bigger problem." Her subtle threat lingered in the air. Daniel stood, his tall frame casting a shadow over her, and gave her a slow, easy smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Well, Ms. Winslow," he said, his voice calm but firm, "thanks for dropping by, but my farm's not part of your HO. I don't follow your rules, and last I checked, my barn, my rooster, and my land aren't bothering anyone." Margaret's lips thinned into a hard line. "We'll see about that," she snapped, before spinning on her heel and stalking back to her pristine, gas-guzzling SUV. Daniel watched her go, shaking his head, a sinking feeling settling in. He'd handled stubborn livestock before, but something told him Margaret Winslow was a different kind of beast. Trouble started almost immediately after that tense encounter. First came the letter's formal notices on crisp HOA letterhead, demanding he comply with Graywood Estate standards. Daniel laughed, crumpling them up and tossing them into the trash, a quiet act of defiance. His farm wasn't under their control, they had no legal power over him. But Margaret wasn't used to losing, especially not to a farmer who dared to challenge her. Soon, the complaints grew more aggressive, turning into anonymous calls to the county about alleged violations. Like clockwork, inspectors began showing up at Graywood Acres, each visit more ridiculous than the last. Health officials, zoning officers, even animal welfare workers arrived, their faces stern, clipboards ready to uncover some awful breach. Every time, they left empty-handed, puzzled by the spotless state of his farm. The health inspector, a tired older man named Officer Bennett, even laughed as he surveyed the tidy farmyard. "Kid," he said, tipping his worn hat, "I don't know who you've ticked off, but they've got us chasing our tails. This is the cleanest place I've seen in ages." He grinned wryly. "Wouldn't be a certain HOA lady behind this, would it?" Daniel smirked. "You tell me." Bennett sighed, resigned. "Can't say for sure, but her name's on every report." Daniel shook his head, more entertained than angry. Margaret was relentless, give her that. It almost turned into a twisted game. How long could she keep this up before she realized it was pointless? He figured she'd eventually tire out and move on to torment someone else. He couldn't have been more mistaken. A week later, while Daniel was fixing a stretch of his old wooden fence, the harsh buzz of a chainsaw cut through the quiet countryside. It wasn't coming from his land but from the edge bordering Graywood Estates. Suspicion gnawing at him, Daniel dropped his tools and went to check. What he saw ignited a cold rage in his chest. A crew of workers was building a towering, ugly steel gray fence in his property. Supervising the job, clipboard in hand and nodding smugly, was Margaret Winslow. Daniel stormed over, his voice low and dangerous. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Margaret turned, her face a mix of fake surprise and forced politeness. "Oh, Mr. Harper," she cooed, "just making some community enhancements. This privacy fence will preserve Graywood Estates' visual harmony." Daniel pointed at the workers, who now looked uneasy, caught in the middle. "This is my land," he growled, fists tightening. "Well," Margaret said smoothly, "that's debatable. We've reviewed old survey maps and believe the property lines were misdrawn." Her blatant lie hung heavy in the air. Daniel's knuckles whitened. They were trying to take his land, piece by piece. "You've got 5 minutes to clear out," he said, his voice icy. "Or I'm calling the sheriff. Trust me, you don't want to explain this to him." The chainsaw fell silent, the tension thickening. The workers hesitated, then started packing up, unwilling to risk trouble. Margaret's eyes narrowed, her composure slipping. "You're making this harder than it needs to be, Mr. Harper," she hissed. "No, Margaret," Daniel replied evenly, "you are." He turned and walked away, feeling her fury radiating behind him as she retreated to her car. For a brief moment he hoped that might be the end of it. He should have known better. The next morning, an official-looking envelope from the HOA waited in his mailbox. Daniel opened it with a dry laugh, expecting more nonsense. Inside was a typed list of supposed violations. The barns, unapproved, red color, excessive noise from his rooster, unauthorized livestock. It ended with a warning: comply within 7 days or face legal action. Daniel laughed aloud, pinning the letter to his fridge like a badge of honor. They had no jurisdiction over him, yet they thought they could bully him into submission. The war, he realized, was just beginning. County inspectors, spurred by Margaret's endless complaints, became frequent sighters. Health officials, zoning officers, and animal welfare workers came and went, finding nothing wrong. Officer Bennett returned, giving Daniel a weary smile. "I'm sick of this, Daniel," he admitted. "Someone's got a vendetta." "Guess who?" "Margaret Winslow?" Daniel asked, grinning. Bennett shrugged. "Can't confirm, but she's behind every call." Daniel admired her persistence in a twisted way. She was throwing everything at him, hoping something would stick. But if she thought he'd surrender his family's legacy, she was dead wrong. The real shift came days later. While repairing a fence, Daniel noticed a small crowd near the Graywood Estates boundary. At first, he thought they were just curious neighbors, but then he saw a camera lens glinting in the sun. Someone was filming him. Approaching, he saw a wiry man in a cheap suit and sunglasses operating a drone over his land. "Hey!" Daniel shouted, his voice cutting through the drone's hum. "What are you doing?" The man barely looked up. "Just checking a property dispute," he mumbled, unconvincingly. Daniel crossed his arms, patience gone. "This is private property. Get that thing out of here before I call the sheriff." The man packed up and fled. That night, another HOA letter arrived, accusing Daniel of new absurd violations. This time he'd had enough. He called his lawyer, Laura, and had a cease and desist order drafted. With legal papers in hand, he marched into the next Greywood Estates HOA meeting. The room hushed as he strode in, dropping the documents on the table. "You've harassed me," he said, voice steady with anger, trespassed, filed fake complaints, and now you're spying. It ends now. Margaret sputtered, "This is outrageous." Daniel smirked. "I've got footage of your investigator." "These papers? They're lawsuits for harassment and illegal surveillance if you don't stop." The board shifted uncomfortably. One member, Mrs. Carter, spoke up. "Maybe we should drop this, Margaret. He's not in our HOA." Margaret's face twisted with rage, but the elderly HOA president, Mr. Thompson, intervened. "He's right. We've got no authority here. If he sues, we're done." For the first time, Margaret faltered. Daniel smiled, savoring the victory. The tide had turned, but he knew she wouldn't give up so easily.